Have you ever wondered why some people shrug off penalties while others feel crushed by them? Let me tell you a story. A friend of mine got a £100 fine for a minor mistake she earns minimum wage, and it wiped out her grocery budget for the week. Meanwhile, for a millionaire, that same fine would mean less than a nice dinner out. Here's the setup. UK fines are mostly flat rate, set in pounds decades ago, and they rarely keep pace with inflation, a concept you know from your shopping bills. The consequence? Fixed penalties that are supposed to deter bad behavior actually lose their power every year. Imagine if a parking ticket cost you a week's pay, but your neighbor, let's call him Lord Moneybags, barely noticed it coming out of his account. It's not just unfair, it's ineffective. Now, you might ask, isn't everyone supposed to be equal under the law? In practice, our penalty system treats the poor and the rich very differently. Technical term alert. Regressivity, when a policy hits lower earners harder than higher earners. And inflation? It's that silent thief making fines smaller and smaller as years go by. The result? Water companies pay pollution fines that are pocket change relative to their profits. Foreign registered cars rack up millions in unpaid ULEZ charges. And the lowest income tax filers get hammered for late paperwork, even if they owe no tax. Why does this matter? Because penalties are supposed to shape behavior and reinforce social trust. When big companies treat fines as a cost of doing business, or disadvantaged people feel punished simply for being poor, faith in the system erodes. That's the real conflict, a justice system that's both weak and unfair. So, what's the resolution? Maybe it's time to ask, what if fines actually stung equally, no matter your income? What if they went up each year, just like your rent or your shopping bill? As we move forward, let's dig into how other countries have tackled this and what we can learn from them. Stick with me, because by the end of this episode, you'll see why fixing fines is about more than just money. It's about rebuilding trust in the law itself. Let's set the scene. Imagine two people get caught speeding. One earns £20,000 a year, the other £2 million. Should they really pay the same penalty? Countries like Finland, Switzerland, and Sweden say no. They use day fine systems, where penalties scale with your disposable income, a technical term for what's left after essentials. It's a bit like progressive tax, but for punishment. In Switzerland, a top-earning driver once got a €1.1 million speeding ticket. That's not a typo. Here's the conflict. In the UK, most fines are flat, meaning the poor feel the pain, while the rich barely notice, a classic case of what economists call an inequitable deterrent. In contrast, day fine systems ensure that a penalty hurts equally, regardless of wealth. And the logic is simple. The purpose of a fine isn't to be punitive for its own sake, it's to change behavior by imposing a meaningful cost. You might be thinking, isn't this too radical for Britain? But it's not futuristic at all. Germany's had means-tested fines since the 1970s, and New Zealand has even debated adopting them. In fact, the approach has been proven to increase fairness and effectiveness by making penalties proportional to what people can actually afford. Let me introduce two more technical terms. Indexation, automatically increasing fines in line with inflation, and graduated enforcement, where payment schedules flex with your means. These aren't pie-in-the-sky ideas. They're tried, tested, and, crucially, they work. So, if fairness is the goal, why do we still cling to flat fines? Maybe because the alternative feels uncomfortable to those who benefit from the status quo. But, as we'll see in the next segment, the evidence for reform is surprisingly strong even in places you might least expect. Let's dig into the data, because this isn't just a dream of Scandinavian utopia. In late 1982, New York, courts ran the Staten Island Day Fines experiment. The setup: link fines to income, adjust for inflation, and see what happens. The conflict? Would people pay up, or would chaos ensue? The results were astonishing. Collection rates stayed high, no drop-off at all. The average fine amount went up by 25%, and the total fines imposed increased by 14%. Most strikingly, non-payment cases dropped from 22% to just 6%. That's a massive improvement in compliance, or, as the technocrats call it, enforcement efficiency. Fewer arrest warrants, less time wasted chasing debt courts ran smoother, saving both money and hassle. Internationally, Germany's shift to day fines saw short prison sentences plummet and fines become the go-to penalty for minor crimes. That's sentence substitution in action less jail. More fines that actually get paid. And in Finland, a modern study found that when speeding tickets rose by about €200 for high earners, reoffending dropped by 15% over 6 months. That's what criminologists call a short-run deterrent effect, especially strong for the wealthy. But here's the twist. When fines are set too high without regard for means, unpayable debt leads to more serious reoffending and net social loss. Dutch and American research tells us that penalties must be big enough to matter, but not so big they push people into crime just to pay them off. So, what's the upshot? Systems that link fines to income and update them with inflation collect more, deter better, and run more smoothly. It's not magic, it's just designing rules that fit human reality. Now, let's talk about what this could mean for the UK's bottom line. Here's where things get uncomfortable. The UK is leaving nearly £1 billion on the table every year because fines don't keep up with inflation. Let's crunch the numbers together. The standard HMRC late filing penalty has been £100 since the 1,980 seconds. If it had just kept pace with inflation, it'd be £275 today, and we'd see an extra £120 million a year just from that one change. Across all small fines, the UK could be raising £800 million to £1 billion more annually without inventing new offenses or raising maximum penalties. That's the power of indexation in pure cash terms. Now you might ask, would linking fines to income make a real difference? International experience says yes. Real-world trials show that income-based fines increase total collected by 25–60%. For the UK, that could mean an extra £400, £960 million each year. That's £23, £35 per household money the government just isn't collecting right now, while services face cuts everywhere else. And then there are zombie fines, hundreds of millions in penalties that sit unpaid, year after year. Income-linked systems could cut non-payment by at least 30%, meaning another £180, £240 million actually gets collected, plus £60, £90 million saved in enforcement costs. That's not just revenue, it's less wasted effort, less frustration, more faith in the system. Let's be honest, most of us never think about where fines go or why so much is written off. But these numbers aren't just accounting trivia, they're a measure of public trust. When people see that penalties don't bite equally, or worse, just vanish into the ether, it chips away at the sense that the rules are real. So, what would it take to fix this? You don't need new laws, just the courage to make the system fair and adaptive. Let's talk about how that could rebuild democracy itself. Let me bring it all home. Fixing fines isn't just about squeezing more cash out of offenders. It's about something deeper, legitimacy. Right now, if you're poor, a £100 penalty can mean skipping meals. If you're wealthy, it's a minor inconvenience. That's not justice, that's theater. And the problem with theater is the audience eventually stops believing the show. So, here's the setup. A system where fines are indexed to inflation and scaled to your income, every penalty actually means something to everyone. The conflict? Change is uncomfortable for those who have always had it easy. When the UK piloted this in the 1,990 seconds, the rich kicked up a political storm, and the idea was shelved, even though it worked in practice. But think about the resolution. When everyone shares the pain equally, something powerful happens. Compliance goes up, resentment goes down, and bit by bit, trust comes back. That's not just my opinion. It's what the data shows. Technical terms, like equal deterrence and system legitimacy, become real lived experiences. People start believing the rules matter again, and that's the bedrock of any healthy democracy. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this all just idealism? But let me ask, if fixing fines helps raise billions, reduce court chaos, and send a message that the law applies to everyone, is it really so radical? Or is it just what justice is supposed to look like? So here's my challenge to you. Next time you hear about a big company shrugging off a penalty, or someone struggling to pay a small fine, remember, it doesn't have to be this way. Fairness is possible. All it takes is the will to make the system work for everyone, not just the few. Let's fix the fines and start fixing our faith in the law.